Emma was just a desperate girl searching for warmth on a cold night when she sneaked into the towering empire of billionaire CEO Nathan Blackwood. But in one reckless moment, she turned his world into chaos. He should have thrown her out. Instead, he fell hopelessly, irrevocably in love. His son, a girl against the world. His sun was setting behind the clustered skyline, painting the city in hues of orange and gold. But for Emma Carter, the evening brought no beauty, only the crushing weight of reality. She walked through the bustling streets with heavy steps, her worn-out sneakers barely holding together. She clutched a folder close to her chest, containing nothing but rejection letters. Emma had lost count of how many job applications she had submitted. Every interview ended the same way. Sorry, we need someone with more experience. We're looking for a different profile. Maybe try again next time. Next time, she didn't have a next time. Back at her tiny, run-down apartment, her mother lay in bed, her health deteriorating with every passing day. The medical bills were piling up, and there was no money left for rent. She had tried everything, waitressing, working at a grocery store, even cleaning jobs, but nothing was enough. And now, she was desperate. A risky plan. Emma stood outside Hawthorne Enterprises, one of the biggest multinational companies in the city. The glass skyscraper towered above her, reflecting the night lights like a castle made of dreams, dreams she never dared to think were hers. Inside those walls, billion-dollar deals were made, fortunes were built, and people like her didn't belong. But Emma had overheard something earlier that day, a conversation between two women at a cafe. Hawthorne Enterprises is hiring. The pay is insane, but good luck getting past the ridiculous application process. Emma didn't have time for applications. She needed a job now. As she watched employees walk in and out of the building, an idea took root in her mind, a reckless, crazy, absolutely dangerous idea. She wasn't going to apply for a job. She was going to sneak in. The sneak in. Taking a deep breath, she pulled a discarded employee ID badge from her pocket, a lucky find from a coffee shop trash can. It belonged to a woman named Jessica Meyer, and while Emma didn't look much like her, most security guards didn't check too carefully if you walked in with confidence. Her heart pounded as she approached the entrance, stepping in line behind a group of well-dressed employees. The guard barely glanced at her badge before nodding her through. Emma was in. The grand lobby stole her breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, polished floors gleamed under soft lighting, and employees in designer suits moved with an air of purpose. She felt painfully out of place in her thrift store blouse and second-hand jeans. But she wasn't here to admire the luxury. She needed to find an opportunity. As she wandered past the receptionist's desk, she heard two women gossiping. "The CEO is back today. I heard he fired someone just this morning." Emma paused. The CEO, of course. She had heard of Nathan Hawthorne, a ruthless billionaire, unapologetically powerful, the kind of man who could destroy careers with a single word. He was the heart and soul of Hawthorne Enterprises, and the most feared name in the industry. She had never seen his face, but she had heard the whispers: cold, merciless, untouchable. Exactly the kind of person she should avoid at all costs. The chaos begins. Emma spotted an open door labeled conference room. The place looked empty. Maybe she could hide inside and figure out her next move. She hurried inside, shutting the door behind her, and then disaster struck. Her elbow knocked against a laptop sitting on the long mahogany table. The screen blinked to life, displaying an open email draft. Confidential finalized contract for merger, CEO approval needed. Emma barely had time to read the subject line before beep, beep, beep. A siren blared through the room. She panicked, pressing buttons randomly, but it only made things worse. The screen flashed red, and within seconds, employees started rushing towards the room. Oh no, the door burst open, and standing there, framed by the golden glow of the hallway lights, was the most intimidatingly gorgeous man she had ever seen. First encounter, sparks and fireworks, her breath caught. He was tall, devastatingly handsome, with a presence so commanding it made the air feel heavy. His tailored charcoal suit hugged his broad shoulders perfectly, his white dress shirt unbuttoned just enough to hint at the power beneath. His sharp jawline could have been sculpted from stone, his lips pressed into a thin line of irritation, but it was his eyes that trapped her, icy blue, unreadable, ruthless, and dangerously captivating. "Who the hell are you?" His voice was low, lethal, and it sent a shiver down her spine. Emma opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The employees behind him stared in horror, whispering among themselves, "Oh God, she's dead. Does she even work here?" No one interrupts Nathan Hawthorne and lives to tell the tale. Emma swallowed hard. She was so dead. I was just touching confidential company documents, setting off alarms, walking into my building, like you own the damn place. He took a step forward. The air between them crackled. Emma had never felt this kind of tension before, like she was standing at the edge of a storm. She could smell the faint trace of his cologne, woodsy, rich, intoxicating. "Explain," he commanded. Her heart pounded. She knew she should be afraid. She knew she should be trembling under his gaze. But instead, all she could feel was a strange, forbidden thrill. And in that moment, she had a terrifying realization. This man, this ruthless, powerful billionaire, was dangerously attractive, and she was in big, big trouble. Fire and ice. The room was deathly silent. The only sound was the rapid pounding of Emma's heart as she stared up at Nathan Hawthorne's piercing blue eyes. The way he looked at her, cold, calculating, and utterly unimpressed, made her breath hitch. She should have been terrified. Any sane person would have been. But there was something about his intensity that made her pulse race for an entirely different reason. Nathan Hawthorne wasn't just a man. He was power, authority, and danger wrapped in a perfectly tailored suit. His presence demanded control. His words dripped with dominance, and yet, Emma could feel something else lingering beneath the surface. Something dangerous, something electric, and it terrified her how much she liked it. "Speak," Nathan commanded, his voice deep and smooth, like the calm before a storm. "Or should I call security and have them drag you out?" Emma swallowed hard, searching for words. She couldn't let this be the end. She needed this job, this chance. "I wasn't trying to do anything wrong," she said, her voice shaky but determined. I heard you were hiring, and I needed to find a way in." Nathan's gaze flickered, his sharp jaw tightening. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his eyes shifted. Amusement, intrigue. She wasn't sure, but she could feel his focus on her, like a fire scorching her skin. "Let me get this straight," he said, stepping closer. She could smell his cologne now, intoxicating, rich, and absolutely lethal. "You broke into my company because you wanted a job." Emma nodded, pressing her lips together. Nathan let out a sharp exhale, tilting his head as if trying to make sense of her audacity. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Then, to her complete shock, his lips curved into the ghost of a smirk. "You must be either incredibly desperate or completely insane," he mused. "Maybe a little of both," she admitted, lifting her chin. His smirk disappeared just as quickly as it had come. "That doesn't excuse what you've done." Emma's heart sank. "I know, but you should be thrown out." She flinched, but her breath caught. "But what?" she whispered, barely able to hear herself over the thunderous beating of her own heart. Nathan studied her, his icy gaze scanning her from head to toe, as if he was debating something dangerous. Then he turned to the stunned employees, still lingering in the doorway. "Everyone out." They hesitated. "Now." Within seconds the room cleared, leaving just the two of them. Emma's pulse skyrocketed. Why did it feel like the walls were closing in? Like she had walked straight into the lion's den. Nathan walked around her slowly, his eyes never leaving her. He was studying her, analyzing her, unraveling her. Emma's breath hitched. Finally, he stopped in front of her, so close that she had to crane her neck to look up at him. I don't tolerate liars, thieves, or reckless idiots in my company, he said, his voice dangerously low. Emma swallowed. She should apologize. She should beg. She should do something. But before she could say anything, Nathan took another step forward. His heat, his scent, his power. It was overwhelming. But I do appreciate boldness. Emma blinked. You do. His lips quirked slightly. It's rare. She didn't know what to say. Then his expression darkened. The smirk disappeared. The amusement was gone. But make no mistake, he warned. If I even suspect you're here to steal, deceive, or play games, he leaned in, his breath fanning against her skin. I will make sure you regret ever setting foot in this building. Emma felt a shiver down her spine, not from fear, from something else, something far more dangerous. She licked her lips, understood. Nathan's eyes flickered to her lips for the briefest second. Then he straightened, his expression turning unreadable once more. You want a job? He asked. Emma's breath hitched. Yes, she whispered. Nathan tilted his head. Then I have an offer. Her pulse roared in her ears. What kind of offer? His smirk returned, darker this time. You'll work for me, he said simply. Directly under me. No applications, no interviews, just you and me. Emma's heart nearly stopped. This wasn't just a job. This was something else, something dangerous, something that would change her life forever. And God help her, she wanted it. A deal she can't refuse. Emma's heart pounded so hard, she swore Nathan could hear it. She had expected him to call security, expected him to throw her out onto the street without a second glance. But instead, he offered her a job, not just any job, a job directly under him. Her breath hitched. What was this? A test, a trap, a cruel game. Nathan Hawthorne was known for being ruthless, feared for his cold-hearted approach to business. So why was he doing this? Emma licked her lips, feeling her throat go dry. Why me? Nathan leaned against the polished table behind him, crossing his arms, his ocean blue eyes locked onto her like a predator, watching prey. You're bold, he said simply. Reckless but bold. Emma frowned. That's not exactly a job qualification. His lips curved slightly. It is in my world. A shiver ran down her spine at the way he said those words, low, smooth, with an underlying promise of something dangerous, thrilling. But let's be clear about something, he continued, his voice dropping to something deeper, something that sent goosebumps across her skin. I don't do second chances. If you take this job, you play by my rules. One mistake, one misstep, and you're out. No excuses. Emma felt the weight of his words settle over her like a challenge. The smart thing to do would be to say no, to walk away, to not get involved with a man who could ruin her with a single word. But she wasn't thinking smart. She was thinking about her mom, about the unpaid medical bills, about the hunger she had felt too many nights when she had to choose between rent and food. This wasn't just a job. This was survival. She lifted her chin. I'll do it. Nathan studied her, his icy gaze searching for hesitation, for fear. But she gave him none. He smirked. Good. Then your first day starts now. Emma's stomach flipped. Now, she repeated. Nathan straightened, buttoning his suit jacket. You wanted in. Now you're in. You work when I say. You leave when I say. And right now, I need an assistant. Emma opened her mouth, then shut it again. She wasn't sure whether she had just made the best decision of her life, or the worst. Thrown into the fire. 30 minutes later, Emma was following Nathan through the executive floor, trying to keep up with his long strides. His office was on the top floor, a massive glass-walled space that overlooked the city like a throne room. Everything about it screamed power. Nathan walked inside, without breaking his pace. Sit. Emma hesitated, before lowering herself into one of the leather chairs across from his desk. Nathan loosened his tie and unbuttoned the top of his shirt. Emma quickly looked away, but not before catching a glimpse of hard muscle beneath the fabric. God, this man was unfairly attractive. You'll be my personal assistant, Nathan said, pulling her attention back. That means you'll handle my schedule, my calls, and anything else I need. Emma folded her arms. So, I'm your glorified secretary. Nathan's lips twitched. You can think of it that way, if you want. She narrowed her eyes. There was something in his tone, something teasing, almost playful. It was disarming. Fine, she said. What do you need me to do first? Nathan leaned back in his chair, watching her. I need you to accompany me to an event tonight. Emma blinked. An event. A gala, he clarified. Business partners, investors, the usual nonsense. Her stomach twisted. And why do you need me there? Nathan smirked. Because I said so. Emma's fingers curled into her lap. This man was impossible. But if you need a reason, he continued, tilting his head, let's just say, I want to see how well you handle pressure. She swallowed. A gala. A night surrounded by the richest, most powerful people in the city. And her, a girl who barely had money for bus fare. But Emma refused to back down. Fine, she said. What time? Nathan's gaze flickered with something unreadable. Amusement, interest, something else. Be ready at 7. She nodded. All right. He smirked again. Wear something appropriate. Emma's stomach dropped. Her heart clenched. She didn't have a dress. She didn't have anything close to appropriate. But she would figure it out. She had to, because this was her chance. And she wasn't going to let anything, or anyone, not even Nathan Hawthorne, stand in her way. A glimpse of something more. That evening, Emma stood outside her tiny apartment, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror by the door. The only dress she owned was a simple black one, cheap fabric, nothing designer. She had done her best to make herself look presentable, but compared to the women who would be at the gala, she would look like a joke. Her chest tightened. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe a sleek black car pulled up in front of her building. Her breath caught. The door opened, and Nathan stepped out. Emma's heart stopped. He wasn't just handsome. He was breathtaking. Dressed in a black tuxedo, his hair styled to perfection, he looked like something out of a dream. For the first time since meeting him, Emma saw not just a CEO, but a man. A man who was far too dangerous for her heart. Nathan's eyes swept over her, and then for the briefest second, something changed, something flickered in his gaze, something like appreciation. Emma's breath caught, but then just as quickly as it came, it was gone. Nathan smirked, let's go, and just like that, Emma stepped into the unknown, into a world where she didn't belong, into a night that would change everything. And most dangerously of all, into a game of fire and ice, with the most powerful man she had ever met. The arrival, eyes on her, Emma felt completely out of place. As she stepped out of the sleek black car, her nerves tangled into knots. She wasn't used to this world. The flashing lights, the grand chandeliers, the murmurs of wealthy elites, whispering behind champagne glasses. She tugged at the hem of her simple black dress, suddenly feeling small, feeling exposed. And then she felt him. Nathan, he stood beside her, towering, powerful, commanding. His hand lightly touched the small of her back. A possessive gesture, a silent reassurance. Relax, he murmured, his voice low and smooth against her ear. The warmth of his breath sent shivers down her spine. Emma swallowed hard. How could she relax when he was this close? The moment they stepped inside, all eyes turned to them, or rather to her. Who's that? She heard someone whisper. Never seen her before. Nathan doesn't bring dates. Maybe she's special. Emma's pulse pounded. She wasn't his date. But standing beside him, feeling the heat of his touch, she couldn't ignore the way her body reacted to him. Nathan leaned down slightly, his lips brushing against her hair as he spoke. Ignore them, they're vultures. Emma glanced up at him, her heart skidding to a halt. Because for a moment, just a fleeting moment, he wasn't the ruthless CEO. He was something else, something dangerously alluring. The dance, a game of fire and ice hours, passed in a blur of polite conversations and business talk. Emma barely understood. Nathan's presence never wavered, solid, steady, and undeniably magnetic. But it wasn't until the music started that everything changed. A slow, sensual melody filled the room. Couples glided onto the dance floor. Emma sighed in relief. Maybe she could slip away now. Maybe come. She froze. Nathan extended his hand. His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. Dance with me. Emma's breath hitched. No, no, no. She wasn't a dancer. She would make a fool of herself. But the way Nathan looked at her, his hand outstretched, waiting, she couldn't refuse. Slowly she placed her hand in his. The moment their fingers touched, her world tilted. Nathan pulled her close, too close. Her chest brushed against his, as he guided her onto the dance floor. Emma sucked in a breath, his scent intoxicating, masculine wrapped around her like a spell. One hand rested on the small of her back, the other intertwined with hers. Relax, he murmured, his lips dangerously close to her ear. Her pulse roared. Nathan moved with ease, with confidence. He led and she followed, not just because she had to, but because it felt right. The world faded, the whispers, the stares, the grand chandeliers above them. None of it mattered. There was only him, only this. You're holding your breath, Nathan whispered, his voice low, teasing. Emma exhaled shakily. Better. He twirled her effortlessly, his grip firm, possessive. Her body betrayed her, melting into his touch, responding to his every movement. She hated this. She hated how good it felt. Why are you doing this? She asked softly. Nathan's gaze darkened. Doing what? Acting like this is more than just a job. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, and then he did something she wasn't prepared for. He leaned in, his lips grazing the shell of her ear. As he whispered, "Who said it isn't?" Emma's heart stopped. Heat flooded her body. Before she could respond, before she could even think, Nathan spun her one last time and pulled her flush against him. Their bodies collided. Her breath caught. The song ended, but the tension between them remained. Thick, heavy, electrifying. Nathan's grip loosened, but he didn't let her go. His gaze dropped to her lips. For one terrifying, exhilarating second, Emma thought he might kiss her. She wanted him to. God, she wanted him to. But instead he smirked. Not bad, he murmured, releasing her hand, and just like that, he was gone. Emma stood frozen, her body still burning from his touch. What the hell just happened? A storm of jealousy. Emma barely had time to compose herself before she heard a sharp, sickeningly sweet voice. That was quite the performance. She turned and found herself face to face with a woman straight out of a fashion magazine. Golden blonde hair, perfect red lips, a designer gown that probably cost more than Emma's entire apartment. Emma knew exactly who she was. Madeline Sinclair, Nathan's ex, a woman born into wealth, raised in luxury, the kind of woman who belonged in this world. Emma forced a polite smile. It was just a dance. Madeline laughed. Oh, sweetheart, you don't actually think Nathan sees you as anything more than entertainment, do you? Emma's stomach twisted. He gets bored easily, Madeline continued, sipping her champagne. And when he does, he moves on. Emma swallowed hard, Madeline's words slicing deeper than she wanted to admit. But before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Jealous Madeline. Emma turned, and her heart stuttered. Nathan stood behind her, his gaze locked onto Madeline with icy amusement. Madeline's expression faltered. I was just. Nathan stepped forward, placing a hand on the small of Emma's back. A silent claim, a warning. Emma shivered. If you're done, Nathan said smoothly, I'd like to get back to my date. Emma's breath hitched. Date? Madeline's eyes flashed with jealousy. But before she could say another word, Nathan turned to Emma, his gaze softening just barely. Let's get out of here. Emma didn't argue, because as much as she hated to admit it, Nathan Hawthorne was the only thing keeping her heart from shattering. The drive, a silence louder than war. Emma sat stiffly in the passenger seat of Nathan's sleek black car, her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. The city lights blurred past the windows, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was him. Nathan sat beside her, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other resting casually on his thigh. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. The air between them was thick, suffocating, charged. She could still feel the heat of his touch from the dance, the possessiveness in the way he had pulled her close. And then his words, "Let's get out of here." Why had he said that? Why had he acted as though she meant something? Emma's fingers curled into her lap, her mind spinning. "Nathan," she finally said, breaking the silence. His grip on the wheel tightened. Her voice was quieter now, more vulnerable. "Why did you call me your date?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let out a slow breath, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. "Did you want me to let her humiliate you?" he asked, his voice edged with something unribbable. Emma frowned. That wasn't an answer. "You didn't have to say that," she murmured. Nathan's jaw ticked. "I didn't lie." Emma's stomach flipped, her breath caught in her throat, her heart racing faster than she wanted it to. Before she could respond, the car slowed to a stop. Emma blinked in confusion. "Where are we?" Nathan exhaled, unbuckling his seatbelt. "My place." Her stomach dropped. "His place." Emma turned to him, her pulse hammering. Why? Nathan's gaze met hers, intense, smoldering, unribbable. "Because we need to talk." And with that, he got out of the car. The penthouse, a world she didn't belong to. Emma hesitated before following him inside. The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering city skyline. The modern interior was sleek, luxurious, just like him. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress, a world she had no place in. Nathan shrugged off his suit jacket and loosened his tie. Emma swallowed hard, suddenly hyper-aware of how disheveled she felt, how out of place she looked in this perfect, pristine space. "Drink?" Nathan asked, already pouring himself a glass of whiskey. Emma shook her head. She didn't trust herself. Not here, not with him. Nathan leaned against the counter, watching her with a gaze that burned. "Are you afraid of me, Emma?" Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered. Nathan smirked. "Slow, dangerous. Then why do you look like you're ready to run?" Because she was. Because he made her feel things she wasn't ready to feel. Because when he looked at her like that, like he could see right through her, past all her walls, it scared her more than anything. Emma forced herself to stand taller. "You said we needed to talk," she said, crossing her arms. "So talk." Nathan set his glass down, his expression shifting. Something in his eyes softened, but only just. "I need to know," he said, his voice quieter now. "Why were you at my company that night?" Emma's stomach clenched. There it was, the question she had been dreading. She turned away, hugging herself. "It doesn't matter." Nathan's voice darkened. "It does to me." Emma squeezed her eyes shut. Emma, she felt him before she saw him. Nathan had moved closer, too close. Her body tensed as she felt the warmth of his presence behind her, the heat of his breath against her neck. "Tell me," he murmured. Emma bit her lip, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. "Because I was desperate," she finally admitted. "I was homeless, hungry. I didn't know where else to go." Nathan went still. She felt his fingers brush against her arm. Gentle, hesitant. "You had nowhere." His voice was quieter now, almost pained. Emma nodded, refusing to look at him. For a long moment, there was silence. And then Nathan did something unexpected. He turned her around, slowly, gently. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs brushing against her cheeks. Emma's breath caught. Nathan's gaze searched hers, intense, unreadable, full of something she couldn't name. "You should have told me," he murmured. Emma swallowed hard. "It wasn't your problem." Nathan's jaw clenched. "You think I see you as a problem." She hesitated. Didn't he? But before she could answer, Nathan's gaze dropped to her lips. Emma's heart stopped. The air around them shifted. Thick, heavy, magnetic. Nathan's fingers tightened against her skin, like he was fighting himself.
like he knew he shouldn't, but he wanted to. Emma's lips parted, her breath shallow, her pulse roaring in her ears. She could stop this. She should stop this. But then Nathan cursed under his breath and kissed her. The kiss, a collision of fire and need the moment. His lips met hers. Emma shattered. A soft gasp escaped her as Nathan's hands moved to her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was fierce, consuming, desperate. Nathan devoured her. His lips claimed hers, with an intensity that stole her breath, that made her knees go weak. Emma clutched at his shirt, her body melting into his, as he backed her against the counter. She felt the heat of him, the power of him, the sheer force of everything he had been holding back. God, he tasted like whiskey, and something dangerous, something addicting. Nathan groaned against her lips, his fingers tangling into her hair. Emma sighed into him, into the warmth of his touch, into the feeling of finally letting go. And then Nathan pulled away, breathless, disoriented, staring at her like she was something he didn't know how to handle. Emma's chest heaved, her lips swollen, her body still burning from his touch. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Emma, her name was a warning, a plea. She knew what he was trying to say. This was dangerous. This was a line they shouldn't have crossed. But Emma didn't regret it, not for a second, because as she stared at Nathan Hawthorne, the ruthless billionaire, who had never let anyone in, she realized she had just become his greatest weakness, and he had become hers. The morning after, a perfect illusion, Emma stirred, her body wrapped in warmth, in comfort, in a feeling she hadn't known in years. For a moment she forgot everything, where she was, what had happened, but then reality crashed in like a tidal wave. Her lashes fluttered open, and the first thing she saw was him, Nathan, lying beside her, still asleep. The morning light streamed through the penthouse windows, casting a golden glow over his features, his strong jawline, his dark lashes, the perfect mess of his hair. He looked different in sleep, softer, vulnerable, like the ruthless CEO had disappeared, and all that was left was a man. Her heart clenched. Last night had changed everything. The passion, the hunger, the way he had held her, kissed her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Emma touched her lips, still tingling from his. What had they done? She wanted to believe it had meant something, but deep down, a tiny voice whispered, what if it didn't? What if this was just a mistake?
A moment of weakness. Her chest ached at the thought. She had fought so hard not to let herself fall for him. But last night had ruined everything. Because now, she wasn't just falling. She had already fallen. Nathan's dilemma, a battle between heart and mind. Nathan stirred, the soft rustling of sheets pulling him from sleep. And then, he felt it, her warmth, her presence. His eyes blinked open, and for a second, he just stared. Emma, in his bed. It should have felt wrong, but God, it didn't. The sight of her, tangled in his sheets, her hair cascading over the pillow like silk, it did something to him, something dangerous, something terrifying. Nathan had always been in control of his life, his emotions, his heart, but last night, he had lost it all, and looking at her now, he knew he was losing it again. He had kissed her, touched her, held her like she was his, and the scariest part, he wanted to do it again, every single day, for the rest of his damn life. His fingers clenched around the sheets. No, he couldn't. This wasn't supposed to happen. Emma wasn't supposed to matter. He had spent years building walls, protecting himself, never letting anyone in, and yet, this girl, this stubborn, impossible, beautiful girl, had walked into his world and destroyed every single one of them. And now, he had no idea what to do. He should push her away. He had to, because if he didn't, he would never let her go. The distance between them, unspoken fears. Emma sat up, pulling the sheets around her. Nathan followed suit, running a hand through his hair, and suddenly, the air between them shifted. Last night had been fire, passion, undeniable, but now, in the daylight, everything felt fragile, uncertain. Emma, Nathan started, his voice hoarse. Don't, she whispered, cutting him off. Nathan stilled. Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Whatever you're about to say, just don't. His jaw tightened. You don't even know what I was going to say. Emma let out a bitter laugh. But I do, don't I? She gave him a sad smile. This was a mistake, right? Nathan's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her. No, he wanted to tell her that last night had meant everything, but the words refused to come, because if he said them, if he admitted what he felt, there would be no turning back. So instead, he said nothing, and that silence, it shattered her. Emma's eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. I get it, she whispered. She grabbed her clothes, her movements stiff, hurried. Nathan watched her, his hands clenched into fists. Every part of him screamed to stop her, to pull her back, to tell her the truth, but he stayed frozen, because the truth scared him more than anything, and so, he let her walk away, even though it felt like he was tearing himself apart, a love left unspoken. The aftermath. Emma walked out of the penthouse, her heart shattered. She had been stupid, so stupid. She had let herself believe, just for a second, that maybe, just maybe, she had meant something to him, but she didn't. She was nothing more than a mistake, and she refused to let herself be someone's mistake, ever again. As she stepped into the elevator, she took a shaky breath, willing herself to forget, to erase every touch, every kiss, every stolen glance that had made her feel like she was falling in love with a man who would never love her back. But as the elevator doors closed, Emma knew she would never forget him, not in a million years. Nathan's breaking point, a man lost in regret. Nathan sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the spot where she had just been. The space beside him had never felt emptier. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He should feel relieved. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? To push her away before she became something he couldn't live without. But then, why did it feel like he had just made the biggest mistake of his life? His fingers curled into the sheets. The scent of her still lingered, and it was killing him. Nathan closed his eyes, his chest aching in a way he had never known before. He had lost her, and the worst part, he had no one to blame but himself. Emma's new beginning, or so she thought. 3 weeks. It had been 3 whole weeks since she walked away from Nathan, since she had left his penthouse, with a broken heart and shattered dreams, since she had sworn she would never look back. And yet, here she was, standing outside Lancaster Enterprises, the very place she had promised herself she would never return to. Her fists clenched at her sides, as she exhaled sharply, forcing herself to be strong. She wasn't here for Nathan. She wasn't here to rekindle a love that had burned her alive. No, she was here because of an opportunity, a real legitimate job offer. After everything, she had decided to rebuild her life. She had started fresh, working tirelessly to prove herself. And now, an unexpected door had opened, a high-profile legal case, one that could change everything for her. And fate, being the cruel, twisted thing that it was, had led her right back to the man she was trying to forget. Would she be strong enough to face him, to pretend that he didn't still own every piece of her heart? Emma squared her shoulders. She had no choice, because this time, she wouldn't let him break her again. Nathan's downfall, a man haunted by his own mistake. Nathan had changed, and everyone around him could see it. The once sharp, ruthless CEO was now distant, irritable, and for the first time, distracted. And the reason? A woman with fiery brown eyes, and a smile that had completely destroyed him. Emma. It had been 21 days since he had last seen her, since he had let her go, since he had watched her walk out of his life, and done absolutely nothing to stop her. And now, he was paying the price. His office felt colder, his nights felt lonelier, and no matter how much he buried himself in work,
He couldn't escape the emptiness that followed him everywhere. He had thought pushing her away was the right thing to do, that it would protect him from the one thing he feared most, falling in love. But now, he realized, he had already fallen, and letting her go had been the worst mistake of his life. But it was too late, wasn't it? A collision of fates, when love refuses to die. Nathan was in the middle of a tense boardroom meeting when the door swung open. He barely glanced up until he heard her voice, and then his world stopped. Emma. His heart slammed against his ribs as he looked up, his breath catching in his throat. She was standing there, poised, confident, and heartbreakingly beautiful. She had changed. Her posture was stronger. Her eyes held fire. She was no longer the girl who had sneaked into his company, vulnerable and desperate. No, she was a force, and she wasn't his anymore. Nathan swallowed hard as she walked toward the long conference table, her gaze cool, unreadable, but he could see it. The flicker of emotion in her eyes, the hesitation, the pain. She still felt something for him, and that realization was both his salvation and his torment. Emma's gaze flicked toward him, but she didn't stop, didn't falter, didn't let the world see that her heart was racing as fast as his. She simply took her seat, her voice steady as she spoke. I'm here as legal counsel for the investors on the upcoming acquisition deal. I look forward to working with you, Mr. Lancaster. Mr. Lancaster, not Nathan, not the man who had kissed her senseless, not the man who had held her in his arms, whispering her name like it was the only thing that mattered. No, just Mr. Lancaster. Nathan's jaw clenched. She was angry. She had every right to be, but he wasn't going to let her go that easily. Not this time. A dangerous game, pushing and pulling until one of them breaks. The meeting ended, but neither of them moved. The room emptied, but Emma stayed in her seat, pretending to go through her files. Nathan stood, his piercing gaze locked onto her. The tension between them was electric, palpable.
You're back.
He said, his voice rough. Emma didn't look up. I never left, she countered smoothly, flipping a page. I simply moved on. Nathan's chest tightened. So this was how she wanted to play it. Fine, you're really going to pretend like nothing happened between us? He asked, stepping closer. Emma finally met his gaze. Did something happen, Nathan? She gave him a cold smile. Because last I remember you made it very clear that it was a mistake. Nathan cursed under his breath. Emma, don't. She cut him off, standing abruptly. She moved toward the door, but Nathan was faster. In a heartbeat, he was in front of her, blocking her way.
Move,
She said, her voice soft but laced with steel. No, Nathan growled. Her breath hitched. His eyes burned into hers, desperate, tormented. I was wrong, he admitted, his voice raw. I was a coward. I let you go because I was scared. Emma swallowed hard. Scared of what? She whispered. Nathan reached out, his fingers brushing against hers, a touch so light, yet so devastating. Scared of how much I need you, he said hoarsely. Emma's breath came in shaky gasps. Her heart begged her to believe him, to fall back into him, but her mind screamed no. She had given him a chance before, and he had broken her. What if he did it again? She shook her head, stepping back. I can't do this, Nathan, she whispered. Not again. Nathan's jaw tensed. For the first time in his life, he felt helpless. He had always been the man who had everything, but none of it mattered if he didn't have her. Emma. She turned away before he could say another word, and as she walked out the door, Nathan knew he was running out of time. If he didn't fight for her now, he would lose her forever, and that was something he could never survive. Nathan's breaking point, when fear turns into desperation. Nathan sat alone in his office, staring blankly at the city skyline. The weight of regret settled deep in his chest, suffocating him. He had never felt this kind of helplessness before. Emma had walked away from him, again, but this time, he knew it wasn't just hurt or anger keeping her away. It was fear. Fear that he would break her again. Fear that he would push her away when she needed him the most. And for the first time in his life, Nathan wasn't just afraid of losing something, he was afraid of losing her. Because without her, nothing else mattered. His wealth, his power, his success, it was all meaningless without the woman who had turned his world upside down. And he wasn't going to let her go. Not again. Not ever. With a determined fire burning in his chest, Nathan grabbed his coat and stormed out of his office. He was going to find her. And this time, he wouldn't let her leave until she knew the truth. Emma's final wall. The last battle between love and fear. Emma sat by the window of her tiny apartment, watching the rain pour outside. Her heart ached with every breath she took, because no matter how much she tried to convince herself that walking away was the right thing to do, deep down, she knew the truth. She still loved him, hopelessly, madly, irrevocably. But love wasn't always enough, because love alone couldn't erase the pain of being unwanted. Love alone couldn't guarantee that Nathan wouldn't push her away again. And she wasn't sure if she could survive a second heartbreak. A knock on her door startled her out of her thoughts. Her pulse quickened. A strange, irrational hope bloomed in her chest, but she forced it down. No, it wouldn't be him. It couldn't be. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the door and opened it. And the moment her eyes met Nathan's stormy blue ones, her world stopped. Rain dripped from his hair. His expensive suit was soaked, but he didn't seem to care, because his entire focus was on her, on the woman he had spent too long denying. Nothing. I love you. The words slammed into her, stealing the air from her lungs. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, because she had waited so long to hear those words. And now they felt too big, too impossible to be real. She shook her head. Nothing. Don't do this. Don't say things you don't mean. Nothing. Stepped closer, his eyes burning with raw, unfiltered emotion. I have never meant anything more in my life, Emma. Her lips parted, but no words came out, because the way he was looking at her, and like she was the only thing keeping him alive, was undoing every carefully built wall she had put up. But still, what if he changed his mind? What if he pushed her away again? She shook her head, her voice breaking. I don't trust you. Nothing. Flinched. The pain in his eyes was unbearable, but he didn't look away, didn't give up. Instead, he grabbed her hands, holding them against his chest. Then let me prove it to you. His voice was raw, desperate, full of something so real, it made her knees go weak. Emma, I was a coward. I pushed you away because I was terrified of how much I needed you. But I'm not afraid anymore, and I will spend every single day proving that to you, if you let me. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Her heart screamed at her to believe him, but her fear still whispered, what if? Nothing must have seen the battle raging inside her, because he did something he had never done before. He let himself be vulnerable. He cupped her face gently, his thumbs wiping away the silent tears streaming down her cheeks. I love you, Emma. His voice was thick with emotion. Not just today, not just tomorrow, forever. And if it takes the rest of my life to earn your trust, then so be it. But I won't walk away from you again, because you are my home. Emma's breath hitched, her chest tightened, and just like that, every ounce of resistance inside her crumbled. She let out a shaky sob as she finally whispered, I love you, too. And in the next heartbeat, Nathan crushed his lips against hers, a kiss that changed everything. The kiss was desperate, wild, unrestrained. It was a collision of pain, longing and love so intense that it burned through every fear, every doubt. Nathan held her tightly, as if afraid she would disappear, and Emma surrendered completely, finally allowing herself to believe in the love she had fought so hard to resist. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling, hearts racing in sync. Nathan let out a soft, shaky laugh. Does this mean you're mine again? Emma smiled through her tears. I was always yours. Nathan's arms tightened around her, And I will never let you go again. She believed him. Because this time, he wasn't just saying the words, he was proving them with every touch, every look, every breath. And this time, she wasn't going to run. Because love had won. Against all odds, against every obstacle, love had won. And it was finally theirs to keep.